think this is quite a difficult question to come up.
I shouldn't have said that.
Ooh, I don't know about this one. Hi guys, welcome back to another video from the Aspiring Medics. My name's Yusuf, I'm an Oxford medical student. I'm also joined by Maaedah.
Hi, I'm also an Oxford medical student.
Yeah, so basically what we're going to be doing is going through this mock interview that Maaedah did about 2 years ago with the head of Oxford admissions, Chris Norbury, and we could be reacting to it and seeing what she thinks about it, and we'll be giving you guys our top tips when it comes down to Oxbridge interviews. So it's going to be a react video, so let's get into it.
So, welcome to this demonstration interview for A100 Medicine at Oxford.
Hi, my name is Mike Glitch. I'm a medical tutor at St Hilda's College.
And I'm Chris Norbury. I'm also a tutor and I'm at Queen's College. So, Maaedah, thanks very much for coming along to interview today. I thought we'd start by asking you to say something a little bit more about one of the things you mentioned in your personal statement. You did some volunteering at an Age UK discharge centre and you met a lot of dementia patients there. I know that was a little while ago now, but can you remember what sorts of things they were suffering from?
So a lot of the main kind of issues that patients had were generally they felt quite lonely, like aside from their physical health and things like that, but just kind of my role was more about chatting to them about how they feel and things. And quite a lot of the patients said they felt lonely and they felt like they didn't want to be a burden as well on people. Mm-hmm. And what other things were they saying? So they were saying that they felt kind of like lost as well through the whole situation. They couldn't really understand a lot of the medical jargon, and in terms of like their sons or daughters or family members sometimes weren't available for appointments, so it became quite difficult, and it just felt a bit of like a whirlwind, the whole experience. So I think those were some of the key issues that patients were.
Right.
So how do you think that went?
So I think I repeated myself a lot, which is fine. That's going to happen, especially when you're thinking of thoughts on the go. Personal statement questions are quite common as like an opening question for not just Oxbridge interviews, but in other universities as well. So it's good to double check your personal statement. And one thing that I found really useful was reading through my personal statement and highlighting bits which I feel like could have led to further questions being opened, and how would I go about that. Obviously you can't predict every question, but it's a good kind of tool to use for interview preparation.
Yeah, I agree. So we spoke about this in our personal statement video, but basically going through each and every single line in your personal statement, thinking, okay, what could the admissions tutors ask? And for every line, have like 2 to 3 lines that you could then say in response to that, for example. And I think Maaedah gave a great example of like thinking about empathy and thinking about patience and thinking about the issues that they could be having emotionally, and also in terms of like information as well. So I thought that was pretty good. Cool, let's carry on.
And they were preparing themselves or being prepared to be discharged from hospital, is that right?
Yes.
So what sort of factors fed into that decision that led to them being judged ready for discharge from hospital?
So I think this was more, so we didn't really get to talk to the doctors as much, but kind of talking to the patients, they seemed quite well and they seemed quite aware of what was going on. They were quite aware that they were being discharged, and after talking to them quite a few times as well, they kind of knew what like papers they had to sign or what they had to read and what meds they needed to take. So I think it's just kind of that awareness, and also there not being any kind of like quite like a big risk to their health right now in terms of just like the surroundings or just themselves. So I think it was like, obviously physically they seemed quite well, but also that awareness and a little bit of like the independence of like, yes, I know this is happening and I know that this is what I need to do following this.
And how did you feel about their readiness for being discharged? Did you feel they were ready to go back home?
I think for some patients they were quite excited to go back home. They just wanted like something a different environment. They wanted to be back to where they felt comfortable. So with talking to those patients, I felt like yes, a lot of them were ready to go home, but also for some of them I think they really were quite overwhelmed with the whole kind of moving out and having to kind of look after things yourself. So and also a lot of it was kind of a lot of patients didn't feel ready to go home themselves, but they were kind of like told by the doctors, yes, you are well enough to go there, I guess, to free up beds. So I think it's like for some patients they seem really happy to go home, whereas for some of them it might have been better to stay a bit longer, but obviously it's quite a difficult decision. Maybe kind of putting them in touch with like other charities or things that could help them would have been a better like getting their step to go home rather than straight away.
Thanks very much. That's great.
Okay, so that one, things I think went well was I think I thought about both sides of the scenario. Like there's some patients that are really happy and some patients that maybe didn't really want to go home, and then also not just leaving it there but coming up with a bit of a solution. I mean, it's a very generic answer, but just thinking a bit wider and just being like, okay, this is a problem, this is how we could potentially address that problem. I wish in this question I didn't answer the question like straight away. I wish I took a few minutes, or not even a few minutes, sorry, a few seconds, just to have a pause and kind of gather my thoughts, because I feel like I would have given probably a clearer answer and a quicker answer. But I guess again, in an interview situation, you're nervous and you kind of go off with what are the first things that comes to your head.
Yeah.
But I also just took some time just to gather my thoughts, and the interviews are not going to be angry if you do that. They would very much like you doing that.
Yeah, I agree, like in terms of gathering thoughts, and also I think this is a really, really good thing that comes up as well, just in terms of patient discharge as well, and think about the factors as to why that might be. Sometimes it is because of something medical, but sometimes it's also social reasons as well, like are they able to be independent? Are they frail? Are they too frail? Do they need to go to a care home? Do they have relatives? Are they able to get involved with their usual daily life, whether it be cooking, cleaning, shopping? And think about this in terms of how independent the patient is. That's also quite important. So yeah.
I think that's a much more cohesive way.
What
I was trying to say in the interview. But yeah, like if I just took a few more seconds just to gather my thoughts properly, I would have probably articulated it a lot better. So it's genuinely not a bad thing if you do that. But yeah.
Cool.
Micah.
Okay, we're going to do the academic part of the interview now, and we're going to pretend that you're a student in my lab. And we want to develop a compound that we can inject into the bloodstream of the person. And the idea is that this compound will help us to determine the exact blood volume of the person that the person has. And so the idea is that we inject a known amount of this compound into the bloodstream. Then after an appropriate period of time, we take a blood sample, and then we can back calculate from the dilution of the compound in the blood the volume that the person has in terms of blood. We now have to design this compound that we're going to inject into the person's bloodstream. And I want you to brainstorm with me what kind of properties we would want this compound to have or to not have.
Okay, so this situation is you are injecting something into a patient and you're going to extract this, get the blood volume, and then measure how much this thing's being diluted, and then you're going to calculate the blood volume.
Correct.
Okay, great.
So academic questions can be challenging, especially if you're an A-level student and a lot of the concepts they ask are quite new, and it's always a difficult thing to kind of think on the spot on things that you're not familiar with. I would always recommend repeating back whatever information they've given you in your own words and just clarifying the question. I think it helps me and it makes me understand things a lot better. When the interviews were in person, I would really quickly, like as they were kind of explaining stuff to me, I would jot it down, and I would have probably drawn like, oh, we're injecting something into a person and this thing is going to then be extracted, and then we're going to see the person's total volume. I would have probably drawn that out really quickly, and stuff like visual things really, really help me understand new concepts. You can definitely do that. I think it's just really good to help you understand what scenario they've kind of thrown at you, and also it helps kind of give the interview a bit of reassurance that you actually kind of are aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I think one, as Maaedah said, like clarifying the information. Two, as you said, reassuring the interviewer that you've understood the question. And three, also gives you more thinking space as well. And sometimes it might just be a case of repeating it, or maybe saying it in your own words also helps you think about it differently as well. So yeah, I think it's quite useful to do, especially when it's a question that you might not have heard of before and one's kind of technical. It just gives you more thinking space as well.
Also, just to add on from that, although the scenario they might throw at you in the academic part will be something new and something you're not really familiar with, like wasn't really aware of like how she would work this out or what she would use this for at that time, but the kind of initial question they ask you is usually something a bit broader and something you can kind of work with. So don't worry too much if it sounds really confusing, because the question they will probably ask you at the start is something to just lead you into that sort of thinking. As you can see, she's just asking me, if we inject something into someone and we need to get that out later, what things does this this substance need to have? So it's quite a nice-ish question that I can work with, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see, I guess, if I work with it.
So obviously this property will need to be unreactive and not react with things in the blood or not enter cells as well.
Okay, so what do you mean by not reactive? What are you worried about?
So maybe like things like enzymes or like just stuff in like proteins in the blood, you don't want it to change their kind of structure, or you don't want it to kind of react with them and then not allow them things to react in their normal reactions.
Okay.
Like,
how many times do I say react in this like 5-second clip? I mean, you can tell I was kind of struggling a little bit, and that's fine.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say, and the interviewer sort of mentioned this as well, is sort of be very specific as well what you mean in terms of react, whether you're thinking about it in terms of chemically reacting, whether you're thinking about it in terms of toxicity, or whatever you're thinking about. If you're really sort of clear, that allows you to, again, it just helps you with your answer, really.
I actually think it's better to be broader initially, and then the interview can kind of drill down, and then you can follow like into what path they are leading you. Because had I been a bit more specific at the start, maybe they were thinking of going down a different path. And I personally think being broader at the start, works better for me, because then I could just like go down where the interviewer wanted me to go. So it's just different ways of working. Equally, if you went really specific, they could be like, okay, yeah, this is an issue as well. You can kind of, the interview can follow down that way, a part where you're more comfortable with, or let's think about other things that could happen as well. So it's totally like up to you, whatever feels more comfortable.
So what do you in particular, what would you be worried about? I mean, we want obviously the blood volume, but we would want the person to still be alive by the end of it. Otherwise we could just bleed them to death, right? We're not doing that. So what are you in particular worried about?
So maybe things like things that are needed in a respiration. So things like
very good.
glucose.
Good. Okay. So it shouldn't attach itself to.
Yeah, like free glucose in the blood and not like kind of prevent it going inside the cell.
Exactly. You said you don't want it to go inside the cell. Why not?
Because then, well, first of all, you wouldn't be able to measure properly how much is being diluted, and also you don't want it to react with stuff in the cell as well. Like it has like no kind of role in the cell, and it might alter things there.
Yeah, because the blood volume, we would lose information.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be good. What's the other thing? You mentioned respiration. We've touched on glucose. What's the other thing that it might interfere with?
Oxygen.
Yes.
Yes.
So we don't want it to do anything to that either. Yes. Yeah. Very good. What else? I mean, in terms of thinking, so anything that interferes with respiration, how else might our compound interfere with oxygen and glucose delivery to cells in a manner that is independent of it reacting with those two?
So like oxygen is delivered by like red blood cells. So maybe like disrupting the flow of blood cells, or like disrupting like maybe being like a barrier to normal blood flow. That would also affect glucose.
And how could a compound that you inject into the bloodstream interfere with blood flow?
So it might obstruct like vessels or something. It might not allow, like, it might be too big, so the size.
Okay. So what is the maximum size that you would allow your compound to have?
I think
about, like where it needs to go.
Okay. So the maximum size, I think it would have to be smaller than the red blood cell.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Because it has to go through like capillaries, and capillaries are like the size of a red blood cell, so it needs to be able to go through that.
So I was a bit nervous when she asked this, because I thought she was asking for a value, and I was like, I have no idea like what size a capillary is, what size a red blood cell is. But I think just saying something vague, which is something that they can work with. Like I do not have a number. Even at this point, I don't have a number of what red blood cell. Like, do you know? No. So just giving something for the interviewer to work with, and just being like, this is my reason and this is my explanation for this. I also think that you can see. So with this interview, they ask for like an initial like question, and I give my initial thoughts, and then it's building on that more. And yes, I've given my initial thoughts, but what about what implications does this have on X, Y, Z, which I had never kind of considered before. So I think this shows that quite nicely. It's just more about like, okay, if you have this thought, what other like implications can this have? And they kind of guide you through that, which is quite nice.
Yeah. it really is sort of like applied A-level knowledge as well. So as Maaedah said, in terms of capillaries being roughly the size of a red blood cell, think about, okay, you don't want it to be any bigger than that. And think about like blood clots, for example. So that's a perfect example of like applying your knowledge as opposed to knowing it.
Yeah, again, like I don't know the values, but at A level, you know, we did do that quite a lot where red blood cells the size of a capillary, and I think it is very like knowledge that you guys know, but it's just, maybe it's not just, they're not like asking for fact recall now. You have to be like, you have to kind of put little bits together, which is what the interview is doing.
Yeah.
It has to be very small and nothing like, definitely smaller than the red blood cell. So that would probably be like the maximum size, probably even a bit smaller than that would be the maximum size.
Yeah, because they get squashed, like the red blood cells. Yes, absolutely. Good. Do you think the compound could be too small?
Yes.
Why?
So in terms of
So I just gave an answer there and didn't explain why. I should probably go with kind of, I feel like the best way to go about it is explaining your thoughts first and then giving an answer, like a conclusion thing. I was probably just trying to buy time, which is fine to do because I didn't have an answer straight from the get-go. But yeah, I should have explained my thoughts there first.
And I guess with everything in biology as well, it's usually an equilibrium and there's always a spectrum. And I think if you're thinking about something being too big or at one end, always think about the opposite and always think, okay, where is that Goldilocks zone going to be? That's usually the case with most things, especially in terms of biology and chemistry. So if you are able to think about that, that helps you and that gives more breadth to your answer.
capillaries have like, so you want this compound to stay in the blood.
Exactly.
So you don't want it to escape from capillaries, like
Very
through pores and stuff. So you need it to be very small, and you need it to be like the good size, but not small enough to escape.
Perfect, good. There's another way how something that we inject into the bloodstream might interfere with blood flow. What else might it do? We've already mentioned red blood cells. Can you think of anything else? What other cell types do we have in the blood?
So you have white blood cells,
Yeah.
platelets,
okay.
So what other way could it interfere with blood flow?
Think about what sometimes happens. People sometimes have issues.
Oh, like clotting, maybe?
Very good. Yes.
So I think this is a really good example of where I'm struggling and where I am finding it hard to figure out what the interviewer kind of is getting me to think about. And you know, she's very kind and helps me through that, and you can like visually see I am struggling, and she kind of gives me a few hints. And I feel like my real interview experience was so reflective of that. Whenever I was struggling and I was like, God, I'm really grasping at straws here, they would kind of give a quick thought and then it would help redirect my thoughts completely. So I think this is a really good example of that. Yeah,
I agree. And I think just like throwing ideas out there and just seeing what sticks as well.
Yeah.
So it could have been even with like, you know, white blood cells, it could have been some sort of like immune dysfunction or something like that. You can just suggest it. It's pretty unlikely, but you can just suggest it. And then as we said in terms of platelets, think about clotting. So I think if you just think about what the function of that cell is or whatever you're talking about and think about, okay, if it goes wrong, what can happen? What is the importance of it? That's a good way to go about it.
Which one would that be? Can you remember? GCSE.
What did you say? Sorry.
Can you remember from biology GCSE? Maybe. Which one of them is it?
Was it platelets do with clotting?
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
So yeah, you could see. Like, I think it's really easy to forget facts, especially under pressure. And I was definitely like, oh, I think it's platelets. And I should totally know that. I think at that point I was like a second year medic. But yeah, you know, we were in lockdown. We didn't, like, it was a long time of not doing like actual medicine. And also, like, in a real interview, I definitely forgot things and I forgot basic facts like that. And they aren't going to penalise you for that because that's not what they're testing. They're testing, can you apply that knowledge? So had I forgot that, I don't think they would have been too bothered. I definitely forgot things in the interview that were quite basic, and I like calculated stuff wrong that were quite basic calculations as well, and it was fine. They just were like, are you sure about this? And then I double checked and it was fine.
Yeah, you can make mistakes in the interview. It's actually about also being open-minded and sort of humble, thinking, oh yeah, actually, let's change this and think about this thing as well.
Yeah, I made so many mistakes in my actual interview and in this as well. And, you know, it's totally fine to do that. They're not expecting you to be, you know, get everything right. They probably wouldn't be too happy with that, and they would change the entire course of the interview had you been doing that. They just want to see how you think on your feet, and that means thinking through things wrong, and that's fine as long as you kind of follow the redirection they've given you. and are able to kind of recalibrate yourself.
Exactly, because they're trying to see your thought process, and they're also trying to see how teachable you are and how compatible in two ways you are to the tutorial system. If you're compatible with the tutorial system, and if your tutorial system's compatible with you. So that's something to think about, and that's exactly how a tutorial would work, is that they give you these small bits of information and then see how well you're able to link those connections together.
Yeah, definitely.
So if somehow the compound were to induce clotting of the blood, then that might not be terribly healthy. Okay, good. So we've talked about it not being able to interfere with respiration. It can't be too big, it can't be too small. We want to keep it in the blood. In which part of the blood? I mean, you've already said it shouldn't go to cells, so it should be in which part of the blood? What do we call the non-cell part of blood?
The plasma.
Plasma, exactly. What is plasma mainly made up of?
Water.
Okay, so what would your substance, what would you want it to be with respect to water?
So you wouldn't want it to dissolve. You wouldn't want it to dissolve in the water part, because otherwise that could affect like maybe water potential. And
you're touching on two things here. So if it didn't dissolve, would it be able to distribute evenly?
No. So I feel like you want some dissolve. You want it to dissolve, but you don't want it to affect water potential.
Okay, so these are two separate.
Okay.
We're treating them as two separate things.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, classic example of I linked two things that weren't supposed to be linked. Like I did something wrong, but I'm able to kind of come back from it and figure out, actually these two things are separate. And I didn't appreciate that before this interview. So yeah, the interview's really kind of fun for you as well to realize just realizing new things and new concepts that you weren't familiar with. But as long as you're if you get something wrong, as long as you follow the tutor's guidance and are able to plan yourself, it's completely fine.
And again, these are not completely new topics, right? In thinking about osmotic potential, think about solution. The fact that there's a linkage between the two, okay, fair enough. But it's, again, applying that knowledge there, that GCSE A-level knowledge.
And why mustn't it affect the water potential? You're absolutely right there.
Because then that will affect like water movement and potentially affect like the volume you're going to calculate.
Volume, exactly, which is the one thing we want to measure. So that's not good. Absolutely good. Now, one other way. So we've talked about it not essentially killing us by interfering with respiration, right? What else? I mean, we're not only concerned about killing people. We might also make people very ill. What might happen if you inject something into the bloodstream? What else might happen? We've mentioned red blood cells, platelets.
So you get like an immune reaction, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you don't want it to be like, you don't want it to trigger, like you don't want it to be like an antigen in the sense that it gets recognized by blood cells and like.
Very good, very nice. Okay, how about removal? So we've got it. You've said it's not too small, so it can't just disappear into the surrounding tissue. Would you want it then to remain in the body indefinitely?
No, you don't want to like just leave something there. Really, you'd kind of want it to get kind of get rid of it. So I guess either by like naturally by the kidneys getting like filtering stuff out, maybe.
At some point, yeah, or
like just being like metabolically like broken down.
Yeah. So if the kidney were to filter our substance out immediately, then we might just lose it straight away, right?
Okay.
So it goes to the kidney, it would be gone. So we would probably want something that is metabolized and then the metabolites are removed. How long would you give our compound to remain in the bloodstream? What do you think is a sensible amount of time?
Half a day, maybe.
Yeah. Why'd you say that?
I feel like you want it to stay long enough so you can kind of obviously extract it and be able to get kind of a sample and measure the blood volume, and maybe a little bit of leeway if something goes wrong the first time, but you don't want it to stay for too long, because obviously not having something like foreign in the blood probably isn't a good idea.
Excellent, very good. So let's now pretend we've found our super compound. We've tested it in animal models, works a treat. We're really, really pleased with it. We now have our first patient.
Okay.
And we're injecting 5 milligrams into this person. What do you know roughly how much liter of blood there is in a person, roughly?
I think off the top of my head, so could it be something like 10?
Yeah, it's a bit less.
A little bit less. 5?
Somewhere, yeah, between 5 and 6 liters. Let's for ease of calculation, let's say 5 liters. Okay. So if we inject 5 milligrams into a person, and they have around 5, we estimate it'll be around 5 milliliters. 5 liters of blood. What kind of concentration would you expect to get out?
So is this in milligrams? Like, is the unit milligrams per liter?
Milligrams per liter, then go to milligrams.
Okay.
Milligrams
So it would be the mass over the volume, so it'd just be 5 divided by 5, which would be 1 milligrams per litre.
1 milligram per litre, and that would be 1 microgram per milliliter.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So I got asked for a calculation in my real interview as well. I think it's quite common for them to ask you to put some calculation. It can be quite daunting, especially my maths is not the best, especially on the go. I mean, the calculation here was fine, which is 5 divided by 5. But it's quite hard to think, on the spot. And this is something where I would totally use a pen and paper for. I probably had a pen and paper next to me, actually. So yeah, feel free to use a pen and paper. Also, if you make mistakes in calculations, it's fine. They will just be like, oh, are you sure like this is the answer? Just double check. I did that in my real interview as well. Don't get worried too much about the maths. It's usually quite guided, and they usually kind of give you numbers somewhere to figure it out.
Yeah, as Maaedah said, calculation questions are actually quite common in Oxbridge interviews. I would highly recommend, before your Oxbridge interviews, go through some conversions, particularly in terms of millimetre, centimetre, decimetre cubed, those kind of ones, so 10 to the power, whatever, just so you know how to convert between them, is what I'd say.
Yeah, but equally, like, if you just make a mistake in that, because it's very easy to make mistakes, and I definitely do that in exams and stuff. Like, they would be quite happy to like clarify. Yeah.
So that's what some expect to happen. So we inject our compound, we wait an appropriate period of time, we take a blood sample, we label it, we send it to the labs. Half an hour later, we get a phone call, and the people tell us we have 50 micrograms per milliliter of our compound.
So it's quite a bit high.
That is very high. What happens?
So they could either be fault, like we maybe injected too much in.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. No.
So
yeah, you're right. It could have been an issue, but let's pretend we can rule that.
So it's increased by quite a large amount. So I'm guessing it's not like to do with like the patient's blood volume being that out or something.
Unlikely though.
Yeah.
Shockingly.
Yeah. So maybe there's a problem in the kind of measuring how much is being diluted by. So maybe there was like an experimental issue.
Okay.
I think this is a nice example of thinking through your thoughts. You can see I had a few answers at the start that I knew weren't right, but I just said that to clarify and be like, I know these are options, but here's why I don't think these are options. And also like having the interviewer kind of like agree with you and be like, yeah, that's actually a good point. It just adds a bit of confidence, and it buys you time to think about other answers as well and other options. So always think out loud. I think it's very difficult to do that when you haven't had a chance to do that before. One thing that I would find really useful is just explaining, like if I had questions about something, I would try, like in class, I would try to think of the answer and try to explain my answer to my teacher and be like, I haven't come across this before, but could this be a solution? And then just gauging by how well she understood, what I was trying to say. That's a really good way of practicing, thinking through your thoughts out loud. Another thing I found really useful was maybe looking at new like medicine topic, like new like diseases I wasn't really familiar with. But like, for example, I think I read like a really small newspaper article on like Alzheimer's and treating Alzheimer's, and I hadn't covered Alzheimer's in A-level really, but when I read the paper, the small newspaper, it was like, oh, it's a protein. It could be due to protein dysfunction, and then I would apply my A-level biology kind of knowledge to it, and I would talk through myself like, oh, this is a problem, this is what I know, could these things be linked, this is how it's happening. I think that's kind of a good way to go about it. Even if you don't have anyone you can speak to, just practicing to yourself is fine.
Yeah. And the other thing to note in this example as well is that if you're thinking about it mass over volume and think about why you're going to get an increase in amount, the way that Maaedah thought about, okay, could it be because of an increased mass? Could it be because we inserted too much in? And could it also be for the denominator being quite low? So in terms of, did the patient volume drop? So thinking about things mathematically in that way was quite good. Even though that wasn't the right answer here yet, that was still really good just to go through the basic info first.
Yeah, actually that's a really good point. That's definitely the way I thought about it, because that's just how whenever I have like a formula or calculate something from a formula, you can just use like things in the formula as reasons why your answer is different, because obviously it's going to change the number. That's definitely a really good way. This formula, this is MDV, isn't it? Yeah, this formula came up in my actual Oxford interview, and it was a very similar thing. As in how what bits in the formula could change to kind of affect the whatever I was calculating at the end. So yeah.
Where might the issue lie? So we've taken the blood sample. I'm telling you, I'm perfect. It's no fault of mine. I'm deflecting the blame firmly somewhere else. So where might the fault lie?
Like with the lab that are analyzing the stuff.
Okay, what might have happened?
They could have like an equipment error or something, or like human error, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. I'm pretty much done. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks, Maaedah.
What do you think about that?
Okay, so the academic part of the interview, it's shorter than you think, and it goes faster than you think as well. I feel like just watching it can sometimes feel a bit long. It's actually really quick. It's the part of the interview I found most interesting. I really enjoyed it in my actual interview. I think this is the part of the interview where you really need to think your thoughts out loud, and where you just cannot be afraid to get things wrong. It's not a bad thing, and if by the end of the interview you can be like, actually I didn't say a right answer, but I knew what I said was wrong, that's a really good sign. I think so. Please don't be afraid to get things wrong.
Yeah, I think as a recap, it's applying your knowledge, it's about thinking out loud, and ultimately it's a case of you will be outside of your comfort zone. They will ask questions you do not know the answers to, and that's fine. They want to know how you can think as opposed to what you know. So be sure just to also go through the hints that the admissions tutors give you and apply your knowledge. The other thing to say with Oxbridge interviews is you actually genuinely can't tell how well they went. If you think it went really badly or if you think it went really well, there's no correlation between how you think it went and how it actually went. Just on that, I had the head of medicine at Oxford when I was getting interviewed at one of the colleges tell me midway through my interview, "You're going round in circles, can you get to the point please?" So I feel like, again, you can never tell. All right, so it's about just keeping on going no matter how you think it went.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, I totally had that as well. In one of my interviews, it was like, just say something, come on. And I was just like, I know this is really silly, but I'm going to say this. And then we literally just spent the interview talking about why that answer was really silly. And we just went through like the reasons behind it. And, please don't be afraid to say really silly things. I think some people feel really conscious of that and feel really, like, oh, if I say this one like stupid point, then I'm never going to get in. That's not true at all. I think everyone says really stupid things in an interview, 100%. And it's just more about figuring out actually what's the science and like what's the rationale behind why that's silly.
Yeah, and focusing on that understanding as opposed to rote memorization. So like in classes, getting used to asking why and actually understanding why point A can lead to point B and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. I think what I did to prepare for the academic part, I found it really useful. Like I would go through like my exam questions in A-level biology, and they quite often present like new diseases or new information at you, and you kind of just have to accept that information and apply it to questions. But I would go back like the question booklets and be like, okay, they've given me this information, why does this happen? Because the information they give you is generally correct in A-level biology. Like they're not going to be lying to you in the exam question. So I would be like, okay, this is a new disease I haven't heard of, or this is a new concept I haven't heard of. Why does like this sentence then lead to this sentence? And I would kind of question along that side. So you don't have to like go online and research really like difficult things. It can literally just be going through like question booklets in your A-level content.
Yeah, and just on that, the key word for me is pathogenesis. So think about, okay, what can cause a disease? How can it be that a mutation can result in, a change in structure of a receptor, and how can that lead to downstream effects? So trying to think about the causes of different diseases, particularly maybe if you mention it in your personal statement about a particular disease, that could be something, because of course anything you mention in your personal statement is fair game for them to ask it in interviews as well.
Yeah, definitely in your personal statement, if you mention a disease, definitely just be a bit aware of it. However, I did that. I think I talked about cancer, or I don't know why I talked about histology in my personal statement. Okay. It's really weird. But then Chris Norbury was interviewing me, who because I had like seen him in Unique in like an access thing, and he's very like oncology based, his lectures in Unique. So then I was like, oh my god, I'm going to be asked like really hard questions about cancer. I'm going to be asked how to cure cancer, and I was really panicking in the interview, like the waiting room. And I was like, oh my god, I don't know how to cure cancer. Like, what am I going to do? I'm never going to get in. And I was like, oh, and then I was trying to read like all these like papers, and I was like, I don't know what any of this stuff means. And you absolutely don't have to do that. It is, I think waiting in the interview room is quite scary, and you see people going through and like talking about how good they are and how much stuff they know in their field. And you know, for me, I found it really helpful just to like distance myself from that. I literally sat in a corner and just put music on. I think I like listened to like Kendrick Lamar or something to like make myself feel better. And you know, just hype yourself up. Like you just need to just have some confidence and don't worry about like knowing really complex things. I think you just need to ask questions for yourself, and whether you figure out the answer is not important.
Yeah, and just what Maaedah was saying, is a lot of it is a mind game as well, right? So making sure that you're in the best mode that you can be possible, particularly to make sure that you're going to be in the zone and ready. And again, the key to that is practicing with your family, friends, teachers, going through these different questions, and that will help you. People react in different ways to interviews and to stress, and that can mean that some people like really want to brag about their achievements or whatever. So don't stay in your own lane is my key there.
We're going to have a question now that involves a little bit of role play, and in a moment I'm going to share an image with you, and your task is really just in a short space of time, you have up to 2 minutes to tell me as much as you can about what's in the picture. And the only obstacle that we're going to put in our way for the purposes of this role play is that we're going to pretend that I'm totally blind and that I have been since I was born. Okay, so do you understand?
Okay.
You understand the nature of the task, yeah?
Yeah. So I'm just kind of explaining this image to you, but you've been blind since birth.
Precisely, yeah. So I'm going to attempt to share the screen with you now. So I hope you can see the image, Maaedah.
Yep.
So your 2 minutes to tell me as much as you can about this image begin now.
Okay, so the image kind of centers on this large Ferris wheel, and the Ferris wheel is just kind of sitting on top of like a river or like a water, but it's very the center of the image. It's in a very kind of looks like a very big city. It's probably the London Eye those type of images.
Fantastic.
Don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah. I know a little bit about the London Eye already. So
the reason I was unsure this is the London Eye is because I'm a northerner, so I don't see it every day. But yeah, I think this question is difficult because it's testing a lot of skills that are not academic. Basically, it's testing, can you be empathetic? Can you actually articulate things very well? And you're with someone who is blind. Are you going to be sensitive to their kind of issues or sensitive to them being blind, but also not being patronizing, which I think is really important, because I feel like potentially a few people might have been a bit patronizing and just assuming like a blind person doesn't know where a Ferris wheel is, or a blind person might not know what the London Eye is. I think that's quite I don't know, I would find that quite patronizing if people just assumed you didn't know what things were just because I was blind. Yeah,
exactly. And a good thing to do is exactly that. One, this question's testing your communication skills. So you might even want to say, do you know what the London Eye is? And you could just ask that, like, are you familiar with it? And that gives you a good idea as to how we go. I'm not going to say too much because I'm interested to see how she describes it. So let's get into it.
I understand that people travel sort of around on the outside of this thing in a sort of pod, is that right?
Yes. So the pods are kind of all dotted like all around the Ferris wheel.
Right, okay. And each of those pods is like a little walk-in room.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Could you just very quickly just tell me approximately how many of those pods there are on this Ferris wheel?
Oh god. Okay, so
just a rough
So maybe
estimate.
like 30 or so.
Okay, yeah, right.
Kind of dotted around. There's quite a few, maybe give or take a couple more, a couple less.
Yeah. Oh, that's nuts. So it obviously has a capacity for quite a large number of people.
Yeah.
And what sort of colour is it? I've always wondered what colour it would be.
So the actual circle itself is a very kind of bright white, and so is like the stand in the middle of the circle. Mm-hmm. But so there's like a bright white circumference, if you like to think about it like that, and then kind of the actual center part of the circle is just very transparent. There's just kind of structural like beams or wires there, so it's just like a white circumference, and then there's those black kind of pods dotted around the white circumference of the circle.
Right. And what can you see through the transparent part?
So you can see the sky, and the sky is very blue. It seems like very good weather in the picture. So it's kind of like a very nice picture.
I've often wondered what blue looks like. Could you describe blue for me?
Okay, so
As soon as I said blue and as soon as you asked colours, I knew what colour was coming, and I was like, for God's sake. I was like, it is really hard to describe colour. Because it is just so visual, I think. And I wish, again, I had just taken a few seconds to gather my thoughts. I wish I hadn't said, oh God, when he asked how many pods were on the London Eye. But I was like, oh, that's like, again, like it seems like a bit of a strange question. But yeah, I feel like giving a number is quite important when you're doing a description of something to explain like, oh, this is like how well spaced out they are. Again, you could see I was like trying to like frantically be like, okay, there's 4 here, there must be like 4 more, like trying to like figure out how many sections they were and how many pods per section. But I think I just randomly just threw out a number at the end, just based on estimating. But yeah, it's a difficult question. I definitely find these parts of the interview quite challenging. Again, just because I'm quite like I don't want to come across as patronizing, but I also don't want to come across as someone who's just assuming like everyone knows what this is, you know. So it's definitely a difficult thing to balance. However, if you just ask, like I just asked like, oh, are you familiar with the London Eye? And you know, then I just checked how much did this person know about the London Eye, and they explained it to me actually, and that was and it was all fine.
Yeah. And it's just a common thing to think about. You guys probably did this from your abstract reasoning on UCAS. Think about it in terms of the size, how big is it, think about the shape of it, think about the distance, what can you see? Like, are you from the opposite side of the river, for example? What else can you see that's like in view? Can you see the river? Can you see a boat going past? Does it look busy? Sort of information like that could be quite useful. And again, when it comes down to estimating, a good thing to think about is like, if you split it up into quadrants, how many can you count on 1 quarter? Just times that by 4, right? So stuff like that you can use as a quick way to allow you to sort of estimate and describe what's going on.
Yeah, I would say for description questions, what I think I did and what I find quite useful is describing the main focus of the image. To be honest, you don't really have time beyond that to describe other things because the interviewer will just move the question, like change the question and direct you to a different way. So I personally think describing the main thing in the image is the most important thing, and then just clarifying, you know, are you happy with what this is? Do I need to go into more detail to explain it to you?
Exactly, because the foreground is the priority and that's what you're really focusing on.
So blue is kind of a more cooler colour. So are there any colours that you kind of are familiar with or something?
Well, I've read a lot about colours, but I've never seen them.
Okay, so blue is it's a more of a cooler colour, and it's kind of like, how do I describe blue? So yeah, it's a very cool colour and it's quite a lighter blue. So think of like a lighter kind of cooler shade. So nothing too kind of, how do I describe it? It's nothing very like fierce or kind of very shocking. It's very kind of a nice like paley cool shade, very kind of calm, and nothing that's very kind of in your face, like something that's very striking. It's just very nice and calm.
Okay, and why do you think people travel on the London Eye?
So I think what I eventually came down to was trying to describe based on feelings, because I don't know, I find colours to be quite like, it evokes a lot of emotion, and you know, we use, you know, the classic, the curtains were blue, that means the person was sad in English, you know. So I think using feelings is quite a nice way to describe colour. I did double check, you know, are there any colours that you're familiar with? If you know, they said they've read a lot about colours. Just so, I don't know, I was trying to think more about, is there a potential like reference I could use? You know, has this person been blind their whole life? Have they seen, you know, certain things that might be helpful that I could compare with? So yeah, it is really difficult. Just again, I really, you know, having this point of not being patronizing, because you don't want to like assume people don't know things or assume people are really happy with things. So it's definitely a hard thing to balance. I again wish I took some time to figure out what I was trying to say. I said the word cool about 7 times, but that's fine as well. You can see I'm nervous. I'm under pressure. I don't know. I don't really know what to say at this point. But that's okay. The interviews know this is a hard question. Like I think me and Chris like had like a 2-minute chat after this, and he was like, "Yeah, this is a difficult question." So yeah, I think just take your time. Try find what the main point is of your answer. Like, so I think where I'm happy with what I said was the emotions part.
Yeah.
I wish I focused on that earlier, and had I taken some time, I would have done that.
Yeah. Agreed. Again, checking understanding of what do you understand about colours. I really liked how she spoke about different shades, so talking about how it's a lighter shade, for example, and also thinking about it in terms of cool, in terms of emotion as well. You can even sort of relate it to any other sort of objects or similar, things of it that you can sort of can think about as well. But it's a really hard question, without a doubt.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a good answer to this question. I don't think anyone would be.
No.
It is very difficult and challenging. It's just as long as you're like being empathetic and understanding, then you'll be fine and not talking down to anyone.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of people go to the London Eye. I think the main thing would be the view, but obviously there's a lot of other things that come with the London Eye. It's quite kind of an iconic like tourist place, so a lot of people just go for the experience as like a tick off the bucket list. So there's quite a few different reasons people go.
Do you think I'd enjoy it?
Yeah, I think you would. Like I was saying, there's quite a few different reasons people go. It'd be nice to just have like a tick off, like, oh yeah, I've been on the London Eye. It's something to say you've done. And also kind of the whole atmosphere would be quite nice. And if you enjoy Ferris wheels, I don't know how much you enjoy them, but...
I've never been on one.
Okay. But if it might be something to kind of have like... it might be something to try. And a nice experience. I think that there's a lot of other things besides the view to enjoy on the London Eye.
Okay.
Ferris wheels.
Well, I'll bear that in mind. I think I'll probably give it a go.
So, I personally think saying someone will not enjoy the London Eye or saying someone like won't have a good time on the London Eye just because they're blind is really not a nice thing to do, They might love the London, like they might love Ferris wheels, they might be like an engineer or something and like are really interested in, or they might be like into architecture and stuff, might be really interested in this thing. There's just might be like someone who wants to go with their kids or with their wife and enjoy the atmosphere. So like I think a lot of people do associate the London Eye with the view and the scenery, which is why I kind of did mention that like a lot of people do go for that reason, but actually there's other things to enjoy. I think that, I personally think it would not be a good idea to say no. And I'm saying, like, I usually don't give, like, this is right, this is wrong, but I really think that is not, it would not be a nice thing to kind of shut someone out for that. Like, just think yourself, like, if you were someone who was blind and you really wanted to try something, like, what's stopping you from trying it? I think, just being empathetic again, I think is quite important. And just asking the person as well, like, oh, do you like Ferris wheels?
Exactly.
Or if you've never been, this might be fun for you.
Exactly. Like, tick off the bucket list, and also think about, who else would you go with as well? Is it also just going to be more of an experience as well? And like Maaedah said, if they're an engineer or if they really enjoy it. So asking those questions as well, having that empathy is going to be quite important, as opposed to just discounting all of that.
Thanks very much, Maaedah. So I'll unshare that screen. And I just wanted to ask if there's anything that you'd like to ask us while you're here at interview that hasn't already been answered.
I think all the questions I've had have been answered really well. Thank you, so I'm good right now.
Okay, well that brings our interview to a close.
You don't have to ask a question if you don't have any. Like, I know so many people are like, make sure you have a question at the end to like answer so you can impress your interviewers. Like, no one's really that bothered, to be honest. They're probably really struggling on time anyway. So, but if you have a question that's genuinely like, oh, this part of the website was unclear about the course, can you just tell me a bit more? Like, this is a good time to ask. But again, I don't think I actually asked anything in my actual interview.
Yeah, it's completely up to you. I didn't ask anything. And also, you want to also think about what is genuinely a really valid question to ask that you're not going to find on the website, and why would you not have found out the answer to it, and why would you want to find out after an interview as well? So I kind of feel like if you're doing it from an informational perspective, I'm not sure what the benefit is. And two, you're not doing it to impress the admissions tutors, because by that time the interview is actually officially terminated. So I would say that if you don't have anything, it's not by force. It's fine to just leave it.
Also in Oxbridge, you have a couple of different interviews with different interviewers, like spread over, I think when it was my time, they spread it over 2 days. So like, I think I had 4 interviews in total over the 2 days. So how many questions are they going to come up with, like, at the end of each interview? By the last one, I was like, I have nothing to say. I was just quite tired, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so don't feel pressured to ask a question. question.
Yeah, exactly. So as Maaedah said, for Oxford University, at least at the moment, the way it works is that you actually get interviewed at 2 separate colleges, and each college will have around 2 interviews. Again, it can depend on the college. So altogether, you'll have about 4 interviews in total. And the way it works is that usually you'll have one interview which is more academic, and you'll have the other which is more sort of medical ethics / personal values kind of thing. So those are the main things that are going to be tested on each. You can try to research the tutors that you're going to get interviewed by and see roughly what's going to come up, but genuinely it doesn't always work, and they could ask questions that are completely different. So it can be useful roughly to know, but to be honest, it usually never works.
Yeah, I think it did me more harm than good. Like, again, like I said, I mentioned like oncology in my personal statement, and then Chris, I knew was quite like his research or teaching is quite oncology focused, and I got myself into a like panic and a bit of like a muddle, and I was trying to figure out what all these like words and proteins are. I had no idea about that. I definitely did not need to know, because my interview wasn't even that, my actual interview wasn't that like oncology focused. It was more actually about cancer screening. So like reading all that academic stuff did not help me, and nor did I understand it. So it I don't know, it's nice to maybe just be aware, I might get something oncology related, or I might get something cardio related or something like that, but beyond that you do not need to read your interviewer's work or anything like that.
100%. And also, as Maaedah said, it can actually throw you off if it is something that's different to what you expected.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Any final words? Any final tips?
I would say, I know we've talked about this, but really just say something in the interview. Don't be afraid to say things. I felt like I was quite confident going in my interview, just because I wasn't afraid to say like I wasn't afraid to be wrong. I wasn't confident that I was going to get in. I was just confident as in, I'm not bothered if I get something wrong. And I think that really helped me, that mindset. I genuinely just blocked out what all the other interviewers were doing, because I found it was quite, I don't know, I felt like it was really like sitting on me that I'm not this well, I'm not this kind of articulate. I remember I went somewhere and there was like 2 like fellow like interviewees who were just going on and on about like some like weird cardio like heart thing, and I was like, I have no idea about this stuff. But like, you just need to kind of, that is their way of showing anxiety and stress, and you just need to figure out what your way of kind of dealing with that is. So please don't worry about that. So yeah, talk out loud, don't be afraid to get things wrong, deal with your own kind of, find a way to deal with your own anxiety and stress. And you know, the interviewers are there to help you. They're not scary. It can be a bit intimidating going into a room with like this, you're getting tested basically, and there's people with so much knowledge there who are potentially really like good at this stuff. So don't feel too intimidated, and just really like use your interviews as like, they're like kind of like, they call it like phone a friend basically. If you're stuck, you know, they will see you're stuck and they will try and help you with that.
Exactly, because it is ultimately a conversation, and yes, they are experts in their field, and that in itself can be both sort of inspiring but also intimidating. But the real denominator there is the fact that actually they're just super passionate about their subject, and that's the real key there. So if you can show that passion, if that comes across both in your energy, in also your verbal expressions and everything else, that also helps as well. So that's what I'd say. The other thing I'd say in terms of pre-interview is like habit. So get into the habit of just reading up on a weekly basis, or just YouTube videos, not because that knowledge is going to help you, but because you're going to get better use of thinking scientifically and thinking why. That's going to be useful. Practicing interviews, whether it be family, friends. We also have an interview tutoring service that you'll find on our bio, and those are the main things basically. We've got also Oxbridge questions, so be sure to make the most out of them. They're on the website, they're completely free, so be sure to check them out. Alright guys, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. We'd really appreciate it if you like, comment and subscribe. Leave a comment if you'd like us to do a part 2, or if you want to see us do any more interview questions. So yeah guys, take care. Bye.
Bye.